Welcome, everybody. It's day 3 of our round 3, and I couldn't be more excited than to welcome 2 people from Respect the Mic and to welcome Kelly Gallagher.
So good to be here. I was looking forward to this all weekend. This is an incredible book of poetry, and its origin story is something I want to hear a little bit about. I love, Peter, when you say in your foreword that this was the first step when poetry was transformed from enemy to ally. I just love that line because Penny and I run into a lot of teachers where that poetry hesitancy with kids and with teachers is still there, very, very strong out there. So love to hear more about what you guys are up to.
Well, and I just, before you start, Peter, I have to mention that you're a teacher and author. You started this spoken word poetry group in 1999. So you've been cranking out like an enormous amount of work, plus the finalist for the NCTE Teacher, Maya Angelou Teacher Award for Poetry. I mean, you have so much in your background that fuels your passion. And then Noelle, I only partly understood what your company that you started 6 years ago is about, but your poetry is in here, which you're going to read. And if you could just tell them a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. Would you like me to start with the poem? Should we start with the
Sure. Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Sure, that'd be great.
All right. So I have a poem in the anthology entitled "On the Bottom of a Swamp." What I remember most about 5th grade, besides the reds and pinks of dresses worn at recitals, the ones Miss McDaniels cooed over, begging me to smile more, or the boy I kissed tasting sweet for the first time before I could even prepare how green eyes made me erupt blush, I recall the study of the layers of rainforests bottom to top, emergent trees that stretched, demanding to be hugged close, the canopy birds could hammock beneath, and the understory. I used to close my eyes on stage, tilt my head down, as if one could see their clear reflection in mud. And though my loving audience probably sang "I love yous," I could never hear it. I'd always thought the understory to be like my smile. It hides forest floor, the way you hide grinding teeth. The sun never truly kisses its bare skin. I'm sure it tastes like the absence of sugar. And though dark, its brightly colored critters warn you, here lies swamp's bottom. For all the forest beauty, Mrs. McDaniels never warned me that rainforests and our minds match at every layer. Any misstep could lead lips to swamp's bottom. It tastes like throat's back, where bitter things hit you hardest, shoot their best shots. She perhaps never saw that through my smile. I'd blush neon, warning, kid afraid of her own voice, most likely because I had volcano sound and molehill body. Whatever case, I never expected depression to have a pretty color warning sign. Wouldn't be till 14 I'd have the courage to stretch towards sunlight or at least reach for a pen, a mic, be challenged to open my eyes, lift my head above canopy, find that sun smiles back, demanding to be kissed. So now, rewinding to me being a freshman in high school, I came through the spoken word program. So I was 14 when I met Mr. Kahn. And even as a freshman, I had been performing and recording professionally, but there were always somebody else's words, someone else's music and such. So the spoken word program was really the first time I got a taste of writing my own words and really cultivating my own voice and things like that. And I graduated from Oak Park River Forest in 2011. I went to Columbia College downtown Chicago for 4 years and really continued to grow and refine who I was in the show business world as a triple threat performer. So performing at Goodman Theater, performing at Steppenwolf, Chicago Shakes, American Theater Company, Victory Gardens Theater, and the like. And after 4 years there, I started my business at 22. And I run a tech-based financial firm. So that it sounds more complicated than it actually is. We are based in technology. So all of our software that we use as independent contractors is based in tech, which is how we are tech-based. So we're technically fintech if you were to put it in a category, but it is a financial firm. So I specialize in personal finance and education in that way. And then in building entrepreneurs and helping entrepreneurs build their brand. So I've been doing that work that I absolutely love to do. And it'll be 6 years, May 14th will be 6 years for me in the industry. Yeah, so it's been a very interesting transition after transition after transition. But I really attribute it to being able to cultivate at 13, 14 years old what I'm doing now.
And what you also do now is work with Peter in classrooms, correct?
Yeah. So it's very full circle how it all happened. So I don't have to be at my office during the day for business to run, because the agents that we train know how to do things on their own. So outside of me being in the office in the evenings and on the weekends, during the day, I get to be here. And for me, it was just very important, as this is Mr. Kahn's last semester, and as there's a lot of transition happening in the program in general, because I know how powerful the work we do is here. Obviously, I'm just a living testament of that. I don't know, I just was just kind of like, if the door opens up for me to come in and like help and pour into where I have been poured into, then I'm absolutely going to take it. So it worked out that way, because ordinarily I just work with the kids after school, and I've been working with the kids after school for about 5 years. So the fact that I get to be here during the day, that I get to really see on the other side of everything, what I experienced as a student, and then I get to work with Mr. Kahn also, like it's a very special moment for me. Mr. Kahn always, when he introduces me to the students, is always like, you know, we're very lucky, we're very fortunate, but I really feel like the lucky one that I get to serve in this capacity. I think that the best thing that you could do for a mentor is really show them not only what you've learned, but actually put your money where your mouth is and actually, you know, show proof of concept. So it's been really awesome to be able to do that during the day.
Wow.
So Peter, maybe some context here would be helpful for people who are not familiar with Respect the Mic. Could you give us a little background, how you started and how it evolved?
Yeah, of course. So getting back to what you originally said, I've been a teacher since 1994. I've been working with young people since 1990. And when I started as an English teacher here in 94, my least favorite unit to teach was poetry. I was terrible at it, just god awful. And I think it's because, you know, when I was in school, I hated it. It was never done where it was contemporary poetry where I could see myself in it. So I was replicating the worst of what I had been taught. And I snuck it in because I felt I had to, but it was terrible. So in about 1998, I asked a former student, Jonathan Vaughn is his name, who liked poetry and was good at poetry, to come in and bail me out, in essence. So he came in and did a really good lesson and brought up the idea of poetry slam. And some of my students said, hey, could we try that here? And I'd been to poetry slams over the years as an audience member. And so I knew enough about it where we could try it. And that next week, the kid with the lowest grade in either of my sophomore English classes won the slam and just blew everyone's mind. But most importantly, you saw him look at himself differently. And he started investing in himself as a student. Then the following year, one of my co-editors, Dan Sullivan, was in my American literature class, and on his 17th birthday was going to drop out of high school. And I tried everything to engage him. The only thing he took at all seriously was poetry when we would do it here and there. So his dad was wise enough to come in and say, hey, Dan wants to drop out. We don't want him to drop out. I know you don't. What can we do to keep him in school? Is there anything we do around poetry? So we came up with something, and I just found this document, in fact, at my parents' house. So we're talking about 1998, 1999, where he put together this separate chapbook of his poetry, and he would read a poem each week to the class. As long as he did all the remaining assignments, I'd average out his grades. Long story short, when you took out his previous grade, he went from the lowest grade out of 2 classes of American Lit to the highest grade. And that's when the light bulb fully went on. It's like, I gotta embrace this more fully. So I'm going to teach poetry differently, but I'm also going to create this club so that Dan and Brandon would have a voice and have something to invest themselves in fully. And that's when it started in 1999. And then I took a leave of absence in 2001, well, a sabbatical first, and taught poetry in the lowest performing boroughs in England and saw this amazing impact there. And when I came back here in 2003, I was able to create my own position where I just teach poetry. And we go into all the freshman English classes, all the sophomore English classes for units. And I've had, I think Noelle is my 5th or 6th alumni assistant who's paid to do this and is an amazing role model. And then it feeds into an after school club. And then one of our mottos is respect the mic, right? Listen to one another. And this book has 76 poems in it. The oldest poet is Dan, who's turning 40 on April 7th, when we're having an event at the Poetry Foundation. The youngest were 14 when they wrote their poems, and they're now seniors in high school. So it's a 3.5-year process. So 76 poems. We have mini bios in here so that students can see, are they a skateboarder? Do they play music? Are they a music producer, et cetera, et cetera. And then we created a free website with all these additional materials and videos and such. So we're hoping it's going to be a game changer. So teachers like I used to be who dreaded teaching poetry, if they had this book and the website, it would be a quick turnaround to engage young people and to feel better about poetry.
I think it absolutely will be a game changer. One of the things that I see in what Noelle says and that I hear from you is that it isn't just about poetry. This is about a whole transformation for kids. It's not about a unit in poetry as much as it is an awakening of who they are.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's a vehicle to get students to invest in themselves and for teachers to see students in a different light. And it's like you're hitting the on button for students to come alive. And not to say, we have plenty of members who came in and were getting straight A's and were destined to go on to an Ivy League school. But we have other kids who it literally saved their lives. They would not be here if not for poetry. And to see how empowering that is quite a remarkable privilege that I've had all these years and that this book represents.
Well, Noelle, I'd be curious if you would agree with that. Was it kind of for you more than poetry?
It was absolutely more than poetry. For me, I was very, very, very shy and did not like I still really don't like being in front of people, believe it or not. But it was something that one really helped. I remember we had one freshman class where a couple of the freshmen were asking Mr. Kahn what I was like as a freshman because he knew. And I thought that was a really funny question because I think PK, would you say like I was simultaneously an 8-year-old and a 60-year-old in a 14-year-old body, and just a leader by nature, and not really knowing how to fully step into that in my own right. And I had a lot of influences pulling at me, especially when I was in high school. So on the one hand, both of my parents are educators. On the other hand, I had some, older cousins who I'm still very close to who were involved in street life. And so I was always kind of fighting between which one was more honorable, which one, that I feel was most respected. And so I think for me, it wasn't that I wanted to be a poet per se, but it was that first I had something to say. And it was the only space in the building where I felt like I was being heard, which I think is first and foremost what anybody wants to feel like. People just want to be heard. And so the fact that I got to practice doing that, and I got to work on craft, and I got to work with other people who could relate to me. I got to work with other kids that they didn't grow up in Oak Park. They grew up in Chicago like I grew up in Chicago. So my narrative was very different coming into the program. These are definitely like things I remember about the culture of the spoken word program and the culture of Respect the Mic. It gave me a roadmap. It gave me an arsenal of tools that I could forge my own life, and it didn't have to be, you know, what my parents were doing, what my cousins were doing. Yeah, so I definitely that resonates with me a lot. That it was so much more than just the poetry. Poetry was just this very unique, uncomfortable teaching tool that showed itself to be just as gritty as I was and just as raw as I was in terms of talent. And it was something that, you know, I could tussle with. Yeah.
I think the word gritty is a good word there, because the poems are very, for lack of a better term, gritty. They're real. They're like real life. And I just know adolescents would connect to them because of their authenticity. You can just feel the voice. You can feel that they come from real experience. I'm wondering though, and either of you could address this, how do you get kids to this? You know, they come into your class at the beginning of the year, probably with the same reluctance. And I'm just kind of curious, as a teacher, I see the finish line. What does the starting line look like?
Well, what was kind of cool that we discovered, there was one freshman class that we had a few weeks ago where the energy was just everywhere, most likely because everybody wanted to avoid having to talk about or deal with poetry. And so I know that in the anthology, among the 76 of us, we have these mini bios in there. And so I said, yo, who can find the 3 current seniors? Like, who can find that in a minute? Who can find the rappers and producers? Who likes this? Who likes that? And I think when you say, hey, there could possibly be a mirror of you in this book, somebody that looks like you, that wrote something that was published that people are going to be reading, it makes it more relevant. And so I think that us presenting it in that way, like, this is a relevant thing. This is somebody that you might know. Like, there are a lot of siblings in the book. Like, my younger brother is in the book, and kids that he knew are like, oh my gosh, yeah, you know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of legacy also in the program. That really just is a testament to the educator and person that Mr. Kahn is, that it's all pulled together. Like, there is an Iman Shumpert, and then people think, oh my goodness, basketball, he's in the book too, you know, and it just piques that curiosity. So I think the mini bios were a really good entry point, and just incentivizing and kind of stirring up some competition a little bit to see who could find what the fastest, led to them then actually reading the poems. Which kind of settled the energy, or focused it rather. I think focus is a better word. So I would say that the mini bios were a great entry point for students.
Can I just say that sorry, your tech company can run itself and you need to go into teaching, because that kind of on the spot decision making is like, oh, we need you in a classroom all the time. Just saying. So Peter, how does it start for you?
Well, what I would suggest, if I were a traditional English teacher, what I think I would do is a poem a day. So this would be my textbook right off the bat. So I think for the first couple of weeks, we would just listen and discuss one poem a day. And again, our website has videos for most of the poets, including their writing process, right? So I'd probably start with Iman Shumpert just to pique interest, right? An NBA basketball champion, and a Dancing with the Stars champion, right? So he's probably the most recognizable name in there, just to have some cachet going. And then I would start using the website with the different writing prompts, and having, what I used to do when I was a traditional English teacher is we'd have 3 rounds of sharing. There was the anonymous round, where kids could give me a poem, I'd shuffle them up and I'd read it, and I wouldn't say who it was. Then the next courageous level is I read it, but I tell who it was, who wrote it. And then the most courageous is they get up and read their own. So what I found over time is it went from, you know, once the anonymous, people are like, whoa, that's good. A kid will be like, yeah, that was me. And before you know it, a few weeks in, you don't need the anonymous round. Kids are just sharing. So I think I would have Fridays where kids get to share out what they wrote inspired by the poem a day, and just start weaving it into the curriculum. It's set up thematically. So if I was teaching a novel, I'd look through it and say, okay, this week we're going to look at this poem. that connects to this scene in Sula, for instance. So that's what's going through my mind to make it a really useful tool from day one throughout the year. And then one other thing the teachers here have done that's really cool is they created a bracket along with the basketball tournament. So they have it out on the board and they started out and kids voted. And I think they're down to the grade 8. So I think there are 4 on each bracket left, and then we'll see who the champion is. So that's another fun way to get kids engaged with it that I've seen.
Those are such great, like, windows into a classroom, real life. I love that. I'm in fact, and you can tell because look at how many pages are turned down, right? All these poems that I'm for certain using in the fall, and this is going to be our center text at for my college classes, because everything in here relates to so much of what I already do, which is a poem a day or something each day to prompt writing. But you have the little bios. I just can't say enough about those, because if all you did was go through this collection and read the incredible things that the students coming out of this have done with their lives, the places they've gone, the full tuition scholarships, that it is such a testimony that this is about more than poetry. So it's just, and besides the fact you're 4 editors, I mean, come on. Hanif got a MacArthur Fellowship. I mean, he's a legend. And Franny Choi, I have her poetry in my collection that I read. I think that, say more about Danny Sullivan, who's one of the first ones in the program. He's one of your editors.
So Dan went from, and he hates me telling the story at this point. Apologies, Dan, if you're watching. But, went from on the cusp of dropping out of high school at age 17 to graduating high school, going to Columbia College where Noelle went and getting a degree in poetry undergrad, and then going to University of Indiana University and studying with Adrian Matika and Ross Gay and the like, and earning a double master's degree from University of Indiana, where he now works for the university, and he's just signed a deal with Haymarket Books for his first book of poetry. Along the way, he helped me run the Spoken Word Club as an alumni, and he's just doing amazing things in the world. He's also married with 2 beautiful kids and has a house in Bloomington, Indiana. But yeah, he's one of dozens of turnaround stories in this book. But starting there, again, he's turning 40 soon, and this has still been such an important part of his life. To go from, basically skateboarding was his thing and not much else, to now, having earned a double master's degree, including an MFA in creative writing, just remarkable.
Wow. I'm reminded of the Common Core state standards, that poetry was not even named as something important enough to be part of our Common Core. And I was so struck at the time, there was a lot of pushback from teachers saying, why isn't poetry one of your kinds of writing that we're going to study? And just to how much this is a testimony to those who are refused to be driven only by what the state says you must teach, and instead bring in the voices of kids. And I admire that so much.
I also think it's ironic that the thing that most often scares kids and scares teachers is the most powerful way to connect with students like Noelle when she was younger. And we found it in our own classrooms. It's not poetry, it's how you approach the poetry. It's what kind of poetry you have kids write to and stand next to. That's very different than, analyze.
And we do analyze along the way. And Kelly, you're clearly a poet, just the way you're articulating this. But yeah, I mean, like Noelle, we're just teaching her poem and a couple others today to freshmen, and we'll ask a question and Noelle will say, okay, where do you find that in the poem? Right. So we're teaching textual support and evidence and all of that along the way, but ultimately it's geared towards how can we help you amplify your own voice and feel good about craft. And, there's so many people in this book who started out reluctant and not having any faith in themselves as writers. And then they go on to become, National Youth Poet Laureate or get published in Poetry Magazine. And then the momentum builds because, you encounter kids who are struggling and saying, this isn't my thing. Okay, well, it wasn't Noelle's thing either.
Yeah.
And look at where she is. It wasn't necessarily Iman Shumpert's thing. He was more into basketball, but it helped him become a better basketball player. He's quoted as saying that.
And you also have an after-school program?
Correct. Yeah. So that's what I started in 1999, our spoken word after school program. And we have, numbers have been down because of COVID, but we have about 40, 45 kids who come twice a week after school for a couple hours, and we put on public showcases where they write, they work in a team, and then they perform that poem for a sold out audience. And I think Noelle, you can speak to that better since you've been through the process and coached the process.
Yeah, so I remember when before my freshman year, there was a kid I grew up with who had heard about the spoken word program, and I think he went to Proviso East, if I'm not mistaken. So I grew up in Chicago, but was like a Chicago gypsy. So I had family and had lived pretty much everywhere. And he was like, you got to go find Mr. Kahn, because he knew that like to write some things. And I was always interested in like writing music and things like that. So I went, as soon as I heard, like I paid attention to the announcements, and I'm like, spoken word and what used to be room 370. And I will never forget how packed the room was that first open meeting. It was like wall to wall. You had, I would say, maybe 25 plus upperclassmen who had been in showcases before. You had alum that had come back. And I was just very curious about why the energy in that room was more intense than my entire first like week of freshman year at this really, really big high school. There was something going on. And I was in there 12 showcases a year. So my whole high school career, I was in 8 of those 12. And as a student, it just really became the safest place in the building. And looking back on it, like as when I was an alum and I would come back and be able to work with the kids who were going through a lot of the same things that I was going through, it was just very interesting to be able to say, you know, it gets better if you just take it a day at a time. Like it gets better, and this is how we utilize this tool, and this is how we nurture this community, and this is how we do this, and this is how we do that. So as a student going through it, I just remember Mr. Kahn challenging the leader in me in ways that I was very like not comfortable with at all. But then being like, okay, I guess like if you think I can do it, then sure. I think Mr. Kahn made me a captain of a group as a freshman, which never happens. And I was like freaking out because that meant that I was going to have to captain peers who were older than I was. But I think his faith in me at that age, because now I train people who are twice my age and such. And I just have gotten better at eliminating that barrier. Like there might be an age difference, but there's something we need to work on together. As a student coming through the program, little nuances like that get refined and tweaked through writing poems and through crafting. You learn how to take feedback and constructive criticism. You learn how to look at your writing objectively over time. Like you're like, I really like this, but it could be better, and this is how I can make it better. You learn how to ask for help. I think that was something for me, it was very difficult for me to do. But you really learn how to ask for help, and how can this be more clear? You learn how to be a more effective communicator. And so these are just little things that happen just as a byproduct, I think, of the program, because we have to write this for a showcase and we have to get ready to speak in front of people, and they're going to be responding. It's very much a life thing. So as an adult now, now that I've been able to take these skill sets and to build a business out of it, because I build other business owners, this is a very practical thing, very pragmatic thing that you will use. So why poetry in the first place? Because because look at the world, because look at the lack of leaders, and look at the skill sets that are missing from adults who are running the country, which is very terrifying. So that's why poetry. So I would say that for sure, that program has a lot of nuances that you really kind of have to be involved in it first and then see it in retrospect. And then you get that, you know, that importance of it.
Man, can you talk about poetry? Wow. I just love listening to you. So Peter, you were going to read a poem from Langston Kerman.
Yes. So quick backstory to Langston. Langston was a very shy basketball player. Basically, that was his identity. And then his junior year, we were in his classes and he kind of liked it. And he joined our club and made our slam team and eventually quit the basketball team to just pursue poetry. He went on and got his MFA in creative writing from Boston University, studying with Robert Pinsky and Louise Glick, Nobel Prize winner. And Louise Glick wrote me a letter. I remember talking about how impressed she was with Langston. And then he went on to become an English teacher in Boston after being an assistant in Noelle's role here, and quietly started doing stand-up comedy. So imagine going from a really shy, reserved person to stand-up comedy, right? And he eventually wrote with Chris Rock. He had his own half-hour show for Comedy Central. He's been on Insecure, Amazon Prime's The Boys. He's now on Bust Down with Chris Redd, and just loves, his favorite thing to do is stand-up comedy, more than writing, more than TV. That's his favorite thing. So in any case, he does occasionally write poetry, and he did for this book. So this is called Who Does This Feeling Belong To? By Langston Kerman. I'm nearly positive there are no other Langston Kermans on this smoking earth. Certainly not in this neighborhood. How frightening to think there might be another who appropriates the prescription for my abscess, who claims my lost packages, who watches anime and sucks juice between his teeth the same as me. I am 32 years old, and I have never known anyone's heart attacks in the morning shower. No monoxide pumped into a closed garage, no true loss. Even my first dog lived to 17. She died quietly on a metal table, the family encircling her like a fleshy halo. Dearest other Langston, how many eggs have you cracked to find the yolk pecked with blood? So that's his poem from the anthology.
Thank you for that. And I asked you to read that because at the end, there are these wonderful interludes between these sections of poetry, and they're mini essays about so many things, but I love this for the conclusion of it. I am not the poet, and this is Langston Kerman again, or lover or athlete that I thought I would be. Still, I owe so much of the person I am today to my experiences as a member of the OPRF Spoken Word Club. It's a place that gave me purpose while I drifted between math classes and books I didn't want to read, and is a community that helped me discover confidence when I otherwise was just a body hiding in oversized clothes. Whether I write another poem again for the rest of my life, Peter Kahn and Dan Sullivan taught me that my voice mattered, and they made me want to give that same feeling to so many others around me. And I love how he says, and that at its core is what this book represents. More than just a simple collection of great poems, it's a gathering of those of us who have been inspired, a small sampling of the many who've been lucky enough to have our lives activated, even for a moment, by words we didn't know were inside of us. That is such a testimony, not only to your work, to your assistant's work. I mean, please come be my assistant, Noelle. Really, I need you in New Hampshire, just
You can't have her,
semester or
sorry.
so. But the idea that you've taken the words of these young people and helped them elevate them and learn a process that will follow them their whole lives. That's incredible.
I am so fortunate, and so fortunate that our school bought into this notion. They created a position. That's not something public education is used to doing, right? And they allowed me the latitude to do that. And as a teacher, to the teachers out there who are maybe thinking about career changes and leaving during these tough times altogether, I would challenge you to think about what is it that you can bring to your school that maybe doesn't exist, and reach out to your administrators and say, look, I can make a difference doing this. Can we try something different? Let's pilot it for a semester or for a year. So that's something I learned about myself, because I was thinking of leaving the teaching profession as well, until I was able to recreate the role that I have in a more impactful way.
So if people want to find out more, Peter and Noelle, they can go to your website, which we will link into the Padlet, correct?
Yes, we will. And there's
And-
prompts there, and actually the performances of so many of the poets here, which I will absolutely be using in my classroom.
Nice.
I just want to say what a pleasure, what an honor it is to meet you, Noelle, and to meet you, Peter, and just so thankful that you guys are out there connecting with kids like this. Truly inspiring.
Well,
Truly.
thank you both. Speaking of inspiring, you guys are legends. So the fact that you would spend time with us, I'm very grateful, honored.
Incredible. I want everyone to get this book. I want all of them to use it with kids, give kids this vision.
Thank you.
Thanks for
so
kicking
much.
off our week, and
Absolutely.
thank you for all you do. It was a real pleasure.
For your
Thank you both.
time. Thanks, you guys.
All
All
righty.
right, be
Take
well.
care.
Okay, bye.